to move Janet's computer, hope I don't break everything. My name is Steve Tinney, and firstly, very happy New Year to you all. Thank you. Let's hope 2017 is more interesting than 2016. I'm the Deputy Director of the Penn Museum, as I think you know. Many thanks to you all for coming out this evening to our Great Beasts lecture, Great Beasts of Legend, the first of the year, featuring one of our favorite speakers. But before I make the introduction proper, I have some public service announcements. Firstly, now the mic seems a little off to me. If I speak here, can you hear me? Hands up the back if you can't hear me. Got you. Firstly, bear in mind that if you're not already a member of the Penn Museum, you can join and get a great price for the entire season. So please do consider joining and coming back and seeing us often. Then, looking ahead, we have the customary announcement for the next lecture, which will be on February 1st. And will feature Dr. Simon Martin, Associate Curator Keeper of the American section, who will present on Monsters of the Maya Cosmos. This promises to be a fascinating exploration of strange beasts and hybrid entities, which will lead us, Simon says, into the imagination and consciousness of an ancient American people. So definitely come back for that. Lastly, those of you who are old hands will forgive me, I hope, for explaining, as I always do, that after the lecture there will be time for questions, which will be moderated by our speaker. And we ask that if you'd like to ask a question, then please come to the microphones in the aisle and ask from there so that everybody can hear it. Now, saving the best till last, to our speaker. Dr. Janet Monge needs no introduction from any of you here, but for those who do not already know her, Janet is the keeper and curator in charge of the physical anthropology section of the Penn Museum and holds a PhD in anthropology from Penn. Janet is a physical anthropologist with a specialty in forensics. Think the TV show Bones, and you will know some of what Janet does, but by no means all of it. She has done fieldwork and research in such far-flung places as Rome, London, Zagreb, Paris, Spain, Kenya, Australia, and Malvern, PA. Still gets a laugh. Third time we've used that joke introducing Janet. Dr. Monge is an active member of our museum community, creating exhibitions such as Human Evolution, The First 200 Million Years, and Year of Proof, Making and Unmaking Race, both of which are currently still on display in the museum. She is also working on a new exhibition, which I can't mention here yet, but watch this space. On top of this, Janet is a dedicated and accomplished teacher and mentor who most recently is making huge contributions to the Center for Analysis of Archaeological Materials, the museum's joint venture with the School of Arts and Sciences. Her accomplishments have been recognized both within the university in the form of a School of Arts and Sciences Dean's Award for Distinguished Teaching by Affiliated Faculty, and in Philadelphia, where she was voted Philly's Best Museum Curator by Philadelphia Magazine in the 2014 Best of Philly Awards. I think you get the point. And we have anticipated long enough, I think, the bridge between contemporary fictional mythology and the real, albeit faraway world that this evening's presentation promises to offer. So let me ask you all to welcome now Dr. Janet Monge, who will enlighten us on the Hobbits of Flores Island, myth, magic, majesty of Homo floresiensis. Take it away.
Hello, folks. Is my mic on? Everybody can hear me okay? Perfect. All right. So I always bring some friends, and I'm going to do a little illustrative sort of a sideline on this and get you really kind of in the mode of thinking about Homo floresiensis. And I'm going to tell you in advance that I was challenged actually in doing this lecture and putting together information. It's actually kind of a hard topic. And I say it's a hard topic because it has many sort of tentacles and components to it, which make it a little bit sort of really difficult to pace through. I found in my thinking about it, as I was able to sort of congeal all these elements within the literature, that I don't know what I think about the fossil, actually, which is sort of a weird place to be. My background is in the study of human evolution. I actually have presented one paper actually on the fossil, which was kind of inconclusive. I was able to then go back and read all of this literature and things that have happened over the last couple of years. And I have to say that I still am a bit in the dark, basically, about what to do. I have become convinced, however, in reading in all the anatomy, I have 100 slides to show you tonight, in reading all of the anatomy, that I indeed must be a hobbit. And the reason why I came to that conclusion is this. I'm going to show you on my body, if that's okay. I have, like the Hobbit, massive feet. My feet are so big that when people walk by me on the sidewalk, they step on them. Okay, so this is not a good sign. Sign number 2, also a Hobbit feature, long arms in proportion to legs. Apparently most people arms and really right below their pelvic joint, and mine extend halfway down my femur bone. So again, I must not be a human. And there's many other indications of this in my biology. And I will go through these hopefully in a reasonable fashion with you all, and I hope you bear with me on this. There's many challenges in it. The challenges, of course, are in the anatomy of it, which I'll hopefully go through and share a bit with you. There's challenges actually in the biogeography of these people, and there's challenges in the chronology, the time frame that's associated with the fossils. So you add all of those things together, as well as all of the in discussions which happen in the literature, you're going to see it's going to be hard to land in a singular place, okay? So my goal is to just really kind of fill you in with this, enlighten you as to what these represent, and hopefully sort of send you off with as many questions as you probably came in with, maybe some more. The first thing that I want to show you is actually on the table with me. And it is just to kind of like, and I know, it's sort of hard to see in an audience like this. It's not meant to be sort of a detailed kind of a look, but I want you to kind of get the gestalt or the feel of what they talk about when they talk about small brain size actually in this particular fossil. So to do that, I actually brought a modern human, okay? So there you go. The average modern human has a cranial capacity, that would be the size of the internal cavity of the skull bones, of somewhere usually between about 1,200 and 1,400 milliliters, okay? The Hobbit fossil actually has an internal cranial capacity of about 400 milliliters. So indeed quite small. And actually I don't have a cast of the Hobbit. As far as I know, they don't have casts of the Hobbit. This is actually an early fossil in human evolution found in Kenya around Lake Turkana. For those of you who are sort of aficionados of human evolution, it's the Kenya National Museum, fossil from East Rudolph at the time, 1813. And this has 100 milliliter greater brain case than Floresiensis, okay? So you can see that this is a teeny skull, and the fossil that I'm about to talk about is a teenier skull than this, okay? So what do people do with this? How did they come to understand it? How did they sort of sort out all this information? It's really going to fall into two camps with a lot of back and forth. You said, you didn't say, you did, you didn't do kind of thing. That either it is a insular population of a very ancient form, a member of our genus, the genus Homo, but extending way far back in time and having affiliations primarily with a very ancient form, older than what's on Flores, called Homo habilis, or sometimes Homo erectus. Some people, situated better with that group of fossils. And the other camp that basically sees it as a pathology, okay? So you'll see that, as I go through the slides, that pathology, not pathology, new species, this, that, okay? And then you'll have to draw your own conclusions. It certainly is unique. There is really nothing like it in the world. It's found on an island, and oftentimes we have an odd assortment of fossils on islands. So it's not that strange, in a sense, that something like this could occur in that kind of environment or that kind of community. Okay, so having said that, are you game to go? I'm going to go through fast. A lot of the anatomical parts to it. Whoa. Okay, a lot of the anatomical parts to it. And hopefully, in the end, if it looks that you would like more information, just come on up and ask a question, and I'll try to answer it as best as I can. So, of course, the fossils were found in 2003 and actually published in 2004 in one of the premier journals, actually, in the sciences, this one in Nature. The two big ones, of course, are Science and Nature. And it became the cover story, basically, for that issue. That really highlights the importance of any fossil discovery. I will say at the onset that human evolution is a very contentious field. And oftentimes, new discoveries are very high profile in the ways that they're published, and that includes these fossils, okay? So she makes it to the cover, and of course, one of the main sort of signature illustrations is of LB, okay? You'll see lingua boa number 1. You'll see that that's the reference which is usually made to all of the anatomical descriptions that I'll go through. There are other fossils that are found actually at the site. And there's another site actually on the island of Flores, which has added some more material to what was the original group of fossils that was found. But this is the one that really has drawn all the attention because of its relative completeness and because it's the only skull which is present in the whole sample. Okay. So the hobbits, okay, how did this come to be associated with these fossils and this particular genus and species? It is, of course, because of the size of the individuals, not only sort of just in stature, but in terms of brain size. And of course, probably you have some of you who are sort of real Hobbit fans and Lord of the Rings fans know that in 2001, 2002, and 2003 in December, the Lord of the Rings was actually presented in a series of episodes, okay, basically reflecting each one of the books. And it was filmed in New Zealand, so of course Flores being relatively close, they came to make this association. So it meant this kind of a fun association, but it's one which is actually sort of stuck, okay? So I don't really like this slide because you can see it's fuzzy. It was from a small illustration and I'm projecting it quite large, but I want to give you that gestalt sort of feel for what they talk about as small, okay? I'll go through some of the details on this, but most people estimate that she was probably, I think on the announcement for the lecture I said 3.5 feet tall, but she's probably closer to 3 feet tall. So that would be the height basically of an average 6-year-old. Okay, so we are talking a very small person. And in comparison to other fossils which are found in our lineage, a super small folk. Okay. You might ask me, and as I go through the slide set, are these other fossils confirming that kind of height? And indeed, they're not. And hopefully I'll be able to show you why I think that as we go through. Many reconstructions were actually done. They think that that individual, that LB1, is probably a female. You'll see various reconstructions in the literature, and I'll go through some of the details as to why they reconstruct her in the ways that they do. But this gives you a relatively good idea of her adult height. In this case, they have a him adult height associated with average modern human. Comparisons, of course, like this are very common in the literature. So you see the hold in the hand, basically, of LB1, and then LB1 compared to a modern human in the same way that I did on the table in front of you by the podium. And it's fitting into a hand of this person, so you know it's quite small. The lower jaw is actually present on LB1, and we'll do some analysis of the teeth and of the dentition. One of the interesting things about it is, with this very small brain case, that the size of the jaw and the individual teeth actually fit into a sample of modern humans. So its smallness is in very particular ways and very particular places. A comparison basically between the major bones of LB1 with a couple of bones of a modern human. And of course, whenever we're trying to illustrate a skeleton, you know, it always sort of goes sideways, because when you sort of put it straight up, it sort of kind of crunches it into too narrow of a space. But I'll come back and look at not only the details of the skull and of the teeth, but also two of the legs and neck down elements, what we would call the postcranial skeleton. The original inventory is actually listed here. The statement is made, and you'll see in the slide set, that there are about 100 individual bones, and there's various ways that they are ordered into individuals, and I'll give you a sense of that too. Many people, because of the small brain size, had come to the conclusion, including two major researchers in the field in Australia, that this individual may be a microcephalic, and also in conjunction with that show a variety of growth disorders that are disruptive, basically, of growth pattern processes. Okay. You can see in 2004 that some people made a quote that basically there were 5 to 6 individuals present in the sample, others say 7. Some say 12, some say 15, some say 14, okay? So they've not been so easily sorted into numbers of individuals. If indeed there's something like 14 individuals, some of them are represented by small isolated bones. That's more to the point, okay? Often when I see general references actually to the fossils from Flores, they talk about these 14 individuals and people have a feeling or a sense there's actually 14 skeletons, okay? No, it's a tooth fragment, it's a toe fragment, it's a this fragment, it's a that fragment. And so it's not, you know, basically like we're dealing with a huge body of information, okay? And then, of course, the case is made that if there are indeed 14, let's say, individuals, that they're all basically showing the same kind of aspect of morphology, then it would be very difficult to describe them as being a pathological specimen, because they certainly all wouldn't be pathologies. Okay? So oftentimes, this sorting and thinking about them as being this distinct insular species is by precluding, okay, this idea that they could actually be pathologic. And they do this by actually making mention of the numbers of individuals that are found on Flores, okay? So for example, just to give you a little bit of a view on this, there is a radius which is found in the deposit. And you can see that, you know, it's sort of listed here. It was present on that full skeleton. You can take measurements of long bones and give estimates of adult stature. So I do this, you know, basically here with a femur bone, but you can see that a femur bone is going to be somewhat of a decent proxy to my height within, you know, some range. And so when they actually take the radius and they project that to an adult height, they actually comes in basically in the end to what would be smallish, but certainly not in the range of LB1, that first skeleton we were looking at. Since the time of the original publication of the fossils from LB, other fossils have actually been found on the island of Flores, and I'll describe those in a little bit, especially, and give you a sense of dates of all of these too. So Mata Menge is the site which is close by in the Soa Basin on Flores, and it's dated much earlier than the fossils that we're going to be talking about, okay, for the most part here. These fossils, okay, published, as I had said, in 2014, found in 2014, published in 2016, are fossils that date to 700,000 years before present. You're going to see that when we talk about the main group of fossils, that they are dated more in the 60 to 70,000 year range. Okay, so this is actually showing or increasing the span of time of fossil occupation of that island. Okay. I take a quote from a very prominent paleoanthropologist, Leslie Aiello, that was in our major publication in my field, the American Journal of Physical Anthropology. And she says, there is no doubt that a pathological explanation for Homo floresiensis is at face value a simpler and more comfortable solution to the many questions raised on the discoveries at Lingua Bao. The argument has been used many times in the past to account for unexpected fossil discoveries that do not fit with preconceived notions for human evolution. However, when pathological explanations are not supported by the available evidence, it's time to examine the preconceived notions that we hold. So many people came to the conclusion that this blows what we know about human evolution really out of the water. So I thought I would spend a moment and tell you a little bit about human evolution, although I bet you lots of you are quite fine-tuned actually in understanding most of the components of human evolution, and this is a typical position in time and degree of relationship of a lot of these fossil forms to each other. The fossil I just showed you is actually a Homo habilis fossil. It's actually this very fossil right here. And you can see that we've got all of these forms in human evolution that can be placed in a time-ordered sequence. And here we're actually going to be looking at fossils that are in these phases associated with earlier forms of Homo. That's going to be sort of our focal point where we sort of narrow our view when we begin these discussions. The Floresiensis fossils, however, share many features in common with this grouping down here, which is done primarily in red, called the Australopithecines. And some of the fossil material from Flores actually resembles apes more than it does any member of our lineage, which makes it even that much harder to really understand. So the notion is, okay, among many, that we are looking basically at a fossil form that shares many affinities, basically in this, approximately this area are sort of timelines and species frame of human evolution. And so, you know, basically they're going to do many comparisons essentially into the fossils in this unit. Unfortunately or fortunately, these fossils looking like this actually are in a time frame when we have modern humans in many other parts of the world. So of course it becomes quite a challenge to try to figure out how they're focused and interdigitated with each other. So kind of a close focus on this in case you need a good place to put your eye. So we're really going from early Homo through Homo erectus, okay? And now for many we can intersperse Homo floresiensis actually into that scheme. Again, a very specialized form located on the island of Flores, okay? There are many interesting challenges in human evolution, including trying to name the number of species which are present in human evolution. It can look quite busy. Actually, at the present time, we're dealing with really a kind of a notion that lots of fossils should be placed in different species from each other. We call these the time frames essentially of splitters, where every fossil sometimes is put into its own unit, sometimes its own species unit. So there's a bit of a sort of a background for, you know, not lumping fossils into other groupings, but actually splitting them into their own little sort of parcel. And I should also say that although these always kind of look sort of really nice in the way they're laid out, in reality there's a lot of time frame shifts and unknowns which are associated with each of these species forms, and people can order and organize fossils in somewhat different ways. Okay. In terms of Floresiensis, you can see it's situated up here. A lot of the slides, I will tell you in advance, I've borrowed from lots of different publications. And initially, LB1 was actually dated to 17 to 18,000 years before present. And in March in 2016, so shy a year ago, the chronology was redeveloped actually on the island and at the site. And they're now pushing those fossils further back in time. So although this looks like this is sort of up in sort of recent times, we should be able to push that a little bit further back and give a much more appropriate sort of time place, okay, to situate those fossils. So many people you see have come to link this fossil with some early developments in Homo evolution, and then really try to understand geographically why they wind up in this particular place so isolated essentially from all other things that are happening in human evolution. Another view of it, here it is, okay, Floresiensis, okay, located as this little sort of branch coming up off of human evolution. But indeed, although many people think that it shares features in common with Homo erectus in Asia, most of its association is actually with deeper parts of human evolution coming straight from Africa. So understanding how this lands, okay, and the way that it lands has been a bit of a challenge. We don't have any DNA from the fossils. I actually have to say that in advance because DNA evidence has actually allowed us to really kind of understand, especially the later phases of human evolution, much more clearly, including sometimes what looks like, really difficult to sort of sort through information, but in the end is actually very clarifying. And that is that human forms have been interacting with each other for a very long time. And these interactions are actually shown off of one of my favorite websites. It is a web blog by John Hawkes. I absolutely tell you, look it up if you've never had a chance to do so. And he calls this particular illustration Pleistocene hookups. Okay, so this is like, the dating site basically of fossil forms, because genetically they are all sharing genetic information. Okay, and that's a kind of a key component in understanding, especially these later phases of human evolution. How isolationist are human species and populations? A lot of people have put that idea of isolation aside and have seen them as much more of an interacting group. So how, and what happens essentially in Southeast Asia with Floresiensis has become quite different or distinct from what we see coming primarily from DNA evidence in other parts of the world. DNA evidence has also shown us that these sort of fine line splits between forms are now absolutely blurred, okay, because of this interaction among these populations. So we are sort of forced into really kind of a different way of thinking about what's happening in these end phases of human evolution with forms like on the island of Flores. It is indeed a challenge. Okay? So in 2004, when the article first comes out, they do, of course, some descriptive elements and some comparative elements, and a lot of the basic information has been modified. For those of you who are close up, you can see that initially they thought that the brain size was like in about a 380, here they have centimeters squared range. But in reality, after much more analysis of the actual cranium, the thinking is that it's quite much closer to about 420 or so in terms of volume. It's grapefruit size, as they say it. I also won't spend a huge amount of time in talking about other materials found at the site, but there is a decent archaeological sample found at the site. Matemenga also has archaeological occurrences, and there's issues as to whether or not a peanut head could have made these tools. Because we have peanut heads in human evolution that are tool-free. So how do we come to see this is structurally organized in a different way, such that they're able to produce really what turns out to be quite sophisticated stone tools, okay, on the island of Flores. Okay. Many people, of course, have made the case, sorry about that, I went by it too quickly, I wonder if I can go back, okay, yes, have made the case that the Flores individuals were swept onto the island by some kind of a natural occurrence. The tsunamis I've seen kind of, I don't think anybody would survive essentially a tsunami carrying individuals across onto Flores. We do know that our ancestors going back at least 60,000 years were quite good at crafting their way across water courses. So it may be that they, drifted, rafted onto the island of Flores. It certainly is not unrealistic to actually think about that kind of movement. But the problem is that once they get to Flores, they seem to be non-interactive with anything else that's happening around them. By the time they go extinct, there are modern humans all over that part of the world. So understanding their relationship to these other forms of the genus Homo is, again, a bit of a challenge for us, okay? So, what's going on Flores? Flores is an island community. Many people think about it as being very separated from really the rest of the world. Certainly on Flores, we see some pretty unusual critters. So for example, and probably the scariest thing that I think I've ever seen is the marabou stork. Okay, I can't even imagine going outside and seeing something like that. I remember I had a little rhyme when I was a kid, you know, now I'm old so I don't cry, I'm just glad the cows don't fly. Like, I can't even imagine what would happen when that flew over. Komodo dragons, giant rats, and then a small version of an extinct elephant, stegodon. So it's not uncommon in island communities to see size changes from ancestral populations. And in the case of Floresiensis, the statement is made that this is an island dwarfism, which is actually happening. And many people have gone on to actually study the processes of island dwarfism in an attempt to really understand whether or not you could take a regular sized member of the genus Homo, put them on an island, see this island dwarfism, and have a fossil that actually looks like Homo floresiensis. And it's still a bit of a contentious issue. In terms of the other materials that are present on the island, some of them are listed here. You can see some of the other sites which are present on Flores, and then a listing of a lot of these different fossil forms. So of course you've got these mini elephants, you have a whole mess of rodents, you have Homo, actually, and eventually Homo sapiens actually on the island. You have a primate species, the macaques. You have a form of porcupine, pigs, cow-like critters, deer-like critters. You have, of course, the Komodo dragons actually on the island, and then you have some tortoises, but they're all in size really a distortion from basically what we see in mainland Indonesia. Okay. The press has a field day with the little people from Flores. Okay. Oops, I don't know why that man's don't like that. A field day, National Geographic, Scientific American, all of them were very excited basically by the finds. All of them were cover stories, and it was covered dramatically in the popular literature as well as the professional literature, which is shown here. In the professional literature, whole issues of major journals in our field actually were devoted to descriptions of everything, okay? The fauna remains, okay? The descriptions of the lower limb elements, the virtual endocast microcephaly, for example, features of the upper limb, features of asymmetry, and other kinds of techniques which are applied to look at these structural features. In other words, every part of the anatomy was parsed, and people actually looked at that are experts in that field, and then came to a particular group of conclusions. For me, I always have difficulty with these kinds of analyses for the following reason. The fossils, as we said, were found in 2003, and except for the people who actually were brought together to do the publications, no one's been able to see the fossils. So if you disagree basically with the conclusions, you actually cannot see the fossils, okay? So I've always made the case that, you know, when, or the sort of the straight thinking about when you study human evolution, you publish so people can check your work, but you can't check their work. So automatically I have a bit of a difficulty in dealing with some of this material, okay? Always, okay, when it comes to the Flores fossils, everyone announces that these are very surprising. So a colleague of mine put together a little mini slide set that basically shows in the sciences, apparently everything is surprising, okay? Like, you know, you conduct some experiment and you're totally surprised by the outcome, okay? And it's more surprising than research in any other fields, okay? I too, okay? So it was really kind of fun to see that this was published actually in Nature, okay? That, you know, of course became convinced that there was sort of something a little unwise or strange going on with these surprising finds, and of course gave us some really kind of cool numbers on this. This is the original crude. Nature also did a cartoon version of the people who've actually talked and actually worked with the Flores fossils, and this is one of these images. Some of the individuals are actually gone. You I think they're going to put the slide sets up for you in case you want to take a peek at it at some other point. And so, of course, a lot of the arguments really sort of started with them when they've been carried forward by others. And then there's even some people who've done some interesting critiques of the fossils actually shown here. The popular books have also been produced. Okay. Mike Morwood, one of the original describers, essentially, of the fossils and the person who was responsible for the excavation of the site, has a popular book about it. It comes out in Smithsonian books, so of course it's relatively easy to get. Jacob, a very prominent paleoanthropologist in Indonesia, actually, when the fossils were first found, decided that the fossils should go to his lab in Jakarta, and this created all kinds of intrigue and problems, which became associated with the original descriptions of the fossils. So this made it into the cartoon version, and a lot of people would say that this was an attempt, essentially, to really kind of remove the fossils actually from particular kinds of work to be conducted on them. In any event, the fossils have been returned to Flores and actually are worked on, okay, by these, scientists that are sort of in this inner circle of scientists. It is also true the case that in nature, the claim was made, or the statement was made, that this is the most amazing group of fossil finds ever found. So not only were they surprising, they actually changed the whole of human evolution. And I guess these things happen in fields, and maybe it's happening here, but I actually am a bit hesitant to sort of jump on the bandwagon. So let's get to some of the data, okay? So dates of interest. Originally dated, actually some of the earlier segments at 70,000 years or so, up to LB1, which was actually dated to quite recent. The chronology was updated in 2016, and it seems like the fossils are between 70 and 60,000 years before present. The earliest modern humans on the island are at 11,000 years BP. The earliest archaeological materials, we've already talked about the site where they now have fossils, okay, are at 800 to 880,000 years before present, okay? So we're talking about a deep time, okay, focus basically on Flores, okay? So there is the original site. In the Soa Basin, we actually have that second site, which is actually earlier. And who knows, maybe with further finds and excavations, more fossils will come to light. The site is super complex, actually. And so I, of course, go back and I'm taking a look at all of the publications and where things are from within this cave site, and how the materials were actually sort of drawn and reconstructed. And I will tell you in advance that really the place of even where the fossils were found has actually changed over time, which is kind of scary to me, okay? So before we get into that, let me give you a little geography. Here is Flores, okay? It is an island in Indonesia. So here's Java, here's Sumatra, basically Borneo, New Guinea, Australia. So as I go through a little bit of geography on this, you're going to see that this area is littered with a series of small islands that in some cases have been emerged, in some cases submerged, depending on sea levels. At the time the Flores fossil, people were living there. These islands would have been with a much greater exposure because, of course, sea levels would have been lower during the bulk of the Pleistocene when glaciers took up a lot of the moisture on the planet. There are, of course, many interesting features biogeographically of this area, including something that probably some of you have heard of as the Wallace Line, a division basically between two really components of Southeast Asia, with faunal materials on one side of the line being quite different from faunal materials on the other side of the line. And this was a descriptive element that came from Charles Darwin's colleague in the formation of natural selection, Alfred Wallace. Okay, so it's called the Wallace Line. Okay. One of the big challenges is how these folks got to Flores and how they became isolated on Flores, when we know that human interactions and movements are quite broad through this area, especially beginning at about 40,000 years ago or so. So, again, with a little info, modern humans are in Australia, okay, 50 to 60,000 years ago. On Borneo, East Timor, New Guinea, there are fossil Homo erectus materials actually in Java that go back 1.5 million years. And in Sulawesi, right here, we have some archaeological sites that go back to 118,000 years into the past. So why is it, that the fossils on Flores are so isolated from everyone else? And how do we have these kinds of movements, yet they seem to avoid, not go in, maybe don't make an impression, don't fossilize, whatever on Flores? It becomes quite a difficult thing to actually envision. So we know they're quite adept at moving through these regions, in other words, and that waterways are not a natural barrier, essentially, to these kinds of movements. Why humans get to Flores only at 11,000 years ago is really not very understandable, especially given that we have all of these other occurrences sort of close by. In terms of the actual sort of position of the fossils in the site, this is one of the early renditions, essentially, of where the fossil finds were actually located. And then you can go on and actually see that some of the fossil positions actually change, through the course of time in the literature. And then, of course, I found the most recent sort of version of the chronology, and you can see yet again the position of where the fossils were found has actually changed within the sediments. So the chronology is quite complex. The excavation in the site actually was quite complex, and the people who actually did the original excavation, which took them many, many years to do, were probably not as careful in the way they actually recorded the information as they might have been. And that's not like a damning statement, it's just a kind of a factual statement that makes our further interpretation of this quite difficult. As I had said, the site is super difficult to excavate. What you're looking at here, one of the elements that actually was excavated actually yielded that partial skeleton that we've been talking about so much. And then, of course, you have the stratigraphic occurrences and the position of the fossils within that, which is, again, updated in 2016. And one of the things that actually happened with that update, you can see LB1 right here, is that rather than thinking of those fossils as being, let's say, 16 to 18,000 years old, that they probably are now much more sort of better or strongly dated at somewhere between 60 and 70,000 years into the past. And one of the reasons why they were able to do this is because the fossils were found below layers of volcanic material versus being interspersed within those layers of volcanic material. And once they were located below these tephras, it became clear that they were older than had been originally thought. So it may be that at some point people go back and rethink and rework, this version of how these fossils are situated to each other when they actually sort of have a better sense of where they're placed in time. I like this room, but the room actually needs to have a clock in it because I'm really bad with time. The archaeological occurrences are quite interesting also too. The tools are very similar to what is called the African Oldowan, and it remains relatively unchanged over the course of what is really 800,000 years of prehistory. When modern humans arrive, we start to have the integration of newer elements. For example, we start to see burial of the dead, we've got pigments, and we have objects of personal body adornment. But there seems, in other words, to be no shift archaeologically in the way the materials are distributed. So they're seeing or saying that there's continuity. So, of course, we've got the two descriptions. Is Flores, especially LB1, a late surviving species of early Homo? or is it a modern human with a growth abnormality, maybe in conjunction with microcephaly? So the rest of the slide set, I'm actually going to go back and forth on those details. Okay, are you game? Kevin, who I gave the slides to earlier, who's from the public engagement actually here at the museum, told me that the slides were kind of boring, actually. Just like really, really bad. And I spent a long time making them. So if you want to nod off, now's the time. Okay, so like just take a little nap and then we'll repeat this. We'll come back at the end and see how it sort of lands. Okay. So many people have actually looked at the cranium and, as I had said, made an association with Homo habilis or to Homo erectus. And they've done it based on a lot of morphological analyses. Okay? And this is the group or the camp, okay, which is probably the biggest portion of individuals who really do see this as an insular manifestation, essentially, of an early form of Homo. The basically other people, okay, like for example, this Jakob, who I talked about, who had taken the fossils to Jakarta, actually measured the LB1 cranium and mandible and found that it was within the range of measurements of Australian Aboriginal skulls and crania that have been found. Okay, so in other words, really beginning to kind of normalize this, okay, within the context of sort of more modern forms of Homo, including modern humans. So no feature of LB1, okay, in his estimation actually was outside the range of what we see in modern peoples. It is indeed the case and remains the case that it is really the smallest brain size that we have in the whole of human evolution. So we don't see anything this teeny, actually, okay? It really is in kind of a chimpanzee sort of a range in terms of brain size, okay? So this is the real kind of unusual component to it that actually pushes a lot of people into talking about them as if they're microcephalic, okay? So it's actually the most unusual find that's ever been found, or it's a pathological find, as I had said, including being a microcephalic. So you can see that the cranium is indeed teeny. There have been many descriptions, essentially, of how distorted it is. So I'll go through some of those details also, too, as we kind of pace through. Okay, so teeny, maybe a microcephal. This is its position in height and cranial size in comparison to everything else in human evolution, okay? And it's relatively recent, okay? So, yep, it could just be island dwarfism, but, you know, maybe there's another way of explaining this. Very excellent person who studies the evolution of the brain, a man by the name of Bob Martin, actually compared the LB1 inside of the skull bones to microcephals. Okay, and came to the conclusion really the following way. One, microcephalic modern humans show a lot of variation in microcephaly. I mean, in terms of the way it sort of restructures essentially the size of the brain and therefore the skull bones that actually surround the brain. And in other words, many different factors, features, diseases can actually manifest in different ways in microcephaly. And I'm sure some of you already know that the Zika virus is producing a type of microcephaly, and this is a new kind of way of seeing microcephaly. So what he had said, his conclusion was that you could fit the Floresiensis cranium into some of the microcephalic samples that he had, actually. Okay, is it a dead ringer? Okay, other people say no. So another very excellent person who studies the brain, Dean Folk, actually felt and came to the conclusion that the Floresiensis fossils, okay, actually fit in terms of the structure of the cranial bones and then the brain that sits underneath it, right within modern humans and very distinct from microcephals. Okay? She also did a combination of this with a syndromatic developmental process called Down syndrome And so you'll see with her work, there's a lot of discussion of microcephaly and Down syndrome, and you'll see some of this actually play out in some of my slides as we go through. Okay. She also looked at the relative size of different parts of the brain and came to the conclusion that LB1 was within the range of normal in terms of the breadth of the frontal lobe of the brain, and in something which is used all of the time in fossil studies and human evolution, something called cerebellar protrusion, okay, which is a pretty unique feature of modern humans. This actually individual was called and actually collected as a person who was labeled as a dwarf. Could be many reasons why a person would have been put into that category, but in terms of affiliation, LB1 situated actually with normal humans. Okay, so she made the case or claim that this was a perfectly normal Homo brain, and indeed was capable of making the kinds of tools that we saw on Flores. Okay. There were also people who made a case that we were looking at in the LB1 individual, a case of endemic hypothyroidism, probably some of which would have occurred intrauterally and is sometimes referred to as a type of cretinism, and basically made the case that the LB1 individual had nothing basically whatsoever in common with this particular variety of growth disorder. Okay. Dwarfism cannot explain the LB1 cranium. Bob Martin again, looking at models of how dwarfism occurs in island communities based on elephant, mammals, primate and general mammal models, came to the conclusion that LB1 does not fit into that kind of trajectory, that you can't explain it as island dwarfism, okay? That it appears to be something which is really distinct from that. Okay? I didn't mention, and it's worth mentioning, that many of the people who talk about the fossils as actually being pathological have pointed out, and I need to point this out to you, that people on Flores today are teeny people, okay? So they've actually made the case that this LB1 individual is a teeny version, essentially, of modern humans actually on the island through some kind of growth abnormality and maybe microcephaly. And they've spent actually a lot of their career in actually describing it in those terms, okay? So LB1 has a combination of characteristics, okay, that maybe actually just look like living populations on the island of Flores, okay. Maybe it is really a disordered developmental process which is creating these forms. The same people, when they look at the cranium, have made the case, and I'll just give you the visual sort of jump off on this, that LB1 individual's cranium is weird, actually, okay, and it is kind of weird. And here they're making a reference to what are asymmetries, basically, in the skull and especially the face. So where the right and the left-hand sides look very distinct from each other in the same individual, which is very uncommon, actually, to see in normal individuals within a population. So this is the original skull. This, they took the left-hand side and did a mirror image of the left-hand side to the right-hand side. Here they did the right-hand side and mirror image, and you can see that the outcome is actually quite distinct. Okay? So there's this weird kind of lopsidedness which is associated with the fossil. And of course, other people have come to another conclusion basically about the lopsidedness, including that the asymmetry may be interpreted as what's called positional deformation. And that is when kids, and I'm sure some of you have seen this, they sort of get a lopsided sort of cranial shape or form because they lie in their cribs in particular ways, or they basically, in some cases, they can have a premature closure of sutures that actually creates a sort of a lopsided appearance. So it can either be asymmetrical and significantly so, not significantly so, or actually be some kind of normal positional deformation. Okay. In other words, the range is out there of this. Okay. The people who talk about the asymmetries have actually quantified it, and the statement is made that there is a 14% asymmetrical distribution in metric features, okay, of the face, which is higher than has ever really been seen. They can't explain it by distortion associated from being in a paleontological or archaeological context, okay. Size, shape, and asymmetry, okay, the status of the LB1 cranium based on 3D morphometric analysis is actually said, okay, by, you know, another group of people who are coming in to do the assessments actually kind of recently. In this case, it says impressed, but this was actually in 2014, that this LB1 cranium is just sort of perfectly shaped and actually is reflecting its association, close association to Homo erectus. Okay. People, okay, going back and looking at the jaw, have made the case or claim that these people on the island of Flores actually have no chins, okay? Because the Flores fossil, we were doing the cranium, but we can actually do the chin, actually has a weakly developed or no chin. So is it that, you know, this is just a small version essentially of modern humans on the island, or is it that this is some fossil forms? Chins are always said to be associated with modern humans, with Homo sapiens, and no other kind of fossil form. So what do we do with a bunch of people who are living on an island that don't have chins? I mean, is it, you know, that they can't press elevator buttons? Okay, I mean, what's going on? Okay, so there's a whole chin discussion about who has chins, who doesn't have chins, what it means to have a chin, what it means to not have a chin. It goes on and on. As I said, I can't land in a singular place in trying to understand this. Okay. There are interesting things about the individual teeth. In tooth dimensions, they're exactly like modern humans. Okay. And then they have a bunch of other kinds of weird things about the teeth, okay, including, okay, strange shape of premolars, okay, and things like this. But not only just strange shape of premolars, I'll show you in a minute, twisted premolars, actually, which are never seen in populations, but are only present on Flores and living people on Flores. Okay, so is this just that connect that makes, you know, some people think that these are just modern forms that have some kind of pathology. In any event, they CT the fossils. They actually look at the chin. LB6 also is a lower jaw that has teeth in it, so they can look at this chin region. This is actually a modern human at the top, and this projection in here is actually what we would call the projection of the chin. They also make a case that there is a backward projection into what would be the region occupied by the tongue in the lower jaw in the LB individuals, which is very unusual for a modern human. So of course then they plot it. Okay, this is where Kevin told me that these were the most boring slides in the world. And you know what? Because I couldn't come to like a singular kind of conclusion, I thought I'd just show you a lot of stuff, okay? So this is actually contours of chin regions, and here is where the LB specimens actually situate, and they situate with the Australopithecines, actually, okay? So they're very, very, very primitive in terms of chin regions. In terms of size of the teeth, actually this is the LB1 individual, and it's falling basically with modern humans. These are a lot of other fossil forms, okay, that are much more, they call megadont, much more bigger tooth forms, okay. So it's not a bigger tooth form like a lot of the early members of Homo. In terms of the teeth, you got me. I don't even know what to say about the teeth, okay. I'm a tooth person. I look at these teeth, I'm going like, really? What's up with this, okay? The teeth are not worn on the same plane. Generally speaking, people have teeth that meet together and they wear in unity with each other, because it's not like you can wear one molar and not the molar behind it, okay? They operate together. What is up with this, okay? I mean, they have peaks and gullies in different places. It's hard to imagine actually how they have this kind of wear pattern. The summative thing which is said is that they have a very fibrous diet, okay, and use powerful mastication processes with their teeth. This is all calculus buildup. It looks like it, is, some cavities or things like this. Actually, it's not the case, okay? There is a great deal of periodontal resorption, essentially, of the bone. There's a lot of bone loss, okay? So the dentition, the jawbone itself, is structured around that, okay? People have looked at the CT scans to see whether or not, okay, there is abnormalities or changes actually in the shape, okay, of the internal components of the tooth, including the pulp chamber and the rooting system. And you'll see that it's got weird roots also too in a minute. At one point, the claim was based on this tooth that this was modern dental work, actually, okay? Yeah. But if you look at it, how do you get that kind of sort of straight line sort of excavation of a tooth? I mean, there's nothing that really says that it's modern dental work, but that's pretty odd. I mean, there's some kind of a process which is occurring which would lead to an erosion like this of the tooth. Usually when a person loses or has a cavity and the cavity gets bigger, and all these sorts of things, you see a change in all of the adjacent tissues in the tooth, including the dentin, as it accommodates this. Eventually, of course, the tooth is going to fail. In this case, it looks like it was actually, drilled into, okay? And it wasn't the natural kind of a cavity sort of formation process, okay? The rotated premolar teeth is weird. It's actually never been seen, okay, in the whole of human evolution. It's in Flores, and it's in the modern people who live on Flores. So there's some kind of connect. I mean, whether or not they are modern peoples that are just placed in a weird kind of a time frame is anybody's guess, actually. Okay, but just know that that particular feature is present, actually, in the Flores remains. At one point, this is a CT scan basically of the skull. The statement was made that the skull bone was abnormally thick. It might be. You see, again, some people say yes, some people have no. What's the comparative frame? Okay. And they will also say, a lot of people, that there is no evidence of sutures between the individual bones of the skull present on CT scan or in gross anatomical detail in looking at the specimen. What that means, I have no idea. There are people who say that the Flores fossil has no maxillary sinuses, the things that probably half of you have aching right now because you have a flu or a cold. Those things, okay, those little holes in there, okay, in the bone that actually give me a focal point for a variety of different kinds of infection. So, of course, in the CT scans, they looked in to see whether or not they could see the formation of these maxillary sinuses, because there's some developmental disorders where there is no maxillary sinus. Okay, so does it have it? Does it not have it? It looks like it's got teeth in the nose. Okay, and the thing is that this means it's filled with sediments. With fossils, it's really hard, even on CT scans, to sometimes see these kinds of detail. So here is the summary. Okay. Closest relationship is to early members of the genus Homo, but with a unique combination of features that denotes a new species in human evolution. That's the way it was described, if it's not a pathology, okay? So it's some early form of human. Postcranial anatomy, and I'm going to have to wrap up relatively quickly, and I already gave you a little bit of a preview on the postcranial anatomy. It's got weird feet. The feet are really big, okay, like flappy, big feet, okay? And they do this in comparison to other bones in the lower limb. No transverse arch in the foot, which is one of the most important things actually in the foot of a biped. It actually is responsible for a spring in the step and our efficiency in bipedal locomotion, both walking and running. Its phalanges are curved, like it's a gripping foot. Okay? However, the proportion of bones is said to be what it is actually in modern humans. Okay? Relatively long arms, so there's Janet Monge again. Wrist bones are more like apes than anything else. Shoulder blades are moved forward as if it's in a hunch position, okay? So you can imagine what this thing looks like, okay? Relatively long arms. Low twist in the humerus, which is associated with particular kinds of forces that operate on the humerus in humans. Curved and really short clavicle. So in other words, it's almost compressed in its chest. It's like this. In normal resting posture, it's like this. Okay? With really short legs and really big feet. I mean, I would love to see this thing actually. And wide femora in comparison to length, okay? I mean, it looks like they're little blunted femurs, okay? They say that they're not even well muscled, okay? So, you know, what does that mean? Thin cortical bone, all kinds of stuff, okay, is associated with this. So, based on the foot and shoulder morphology, inconsistent with endurance running, okay, like we would see in a modern human, and the forelimb morphology is inconsistent with tool making and other manipulative behaviors. Okay? All right. Okay. So let's take a peek at some of the things. And again, this will be sort of the end of the whole thing. They do have bones of the wrist, and these are the ones which actually are said to be, and you can see how this is beautiful, isn't it? That it's more like apes in its position, basically of the articular facets of these bones of the wrist. Many people have looked at a lot of these features, both in the cranium and in the postcranial skeleton, and have come to the conclusion that this is a primary growth hormone insensitivity called Larsen syndrome. Okay, who knows? Okay. These weird femur bones, okay, they're very asymmetrical, have thick cortical or dense bone, and really weak muscle markings. Okay. And again, CT scan, looking at the density of the bone. Looking at the contours of the bone. The femoral neck is super flattened, okay? All of these kinds of things that we don't really see in modern humans, okay? The humerus, all human humeri have a bit of a twist in the shaft. This has no twist in the shaft. Feet, we already talked a little bit about. They sort of bucket-like feet, okay? Hafted onto what is a very, very short hind limb. And again, Homo floresiensis is actually situated in the apes, okay, in these features, if you do these kinds of analyses, okay. So one person actually did a reconstruction of floresiensis, and this is the way they pictured it, okay. So yeah, weird limb proportions, arms that face forward, features associated with weight bearing in the hands, lots of things, okay. And then, of course, in the final two slides I have here, I did get through 100. The original describer, okay, Moorwood, okay, is interviewed on 60 Minutes. Okay, is it worth going to Ireland and digging for leprechauns? Yeah, what the hell? Okay. If you pay me, I'll do anything. Could this happen anywhere in the world? And the response is actually sort of interesting. He basically says that island communities in this very isolated way from, basically other features or factors that are happening in human evolution can present with an odd group of challenges, okay? Do we need to jump on a bandwagon, have it as a new species? What is the tempered way of thinking about this? Well, that, of course, is the challenge. Where do I land? Okay, I land, as I had told you in the beginning. It absolutely, seems to me as a person, and Steve introduced me this way, I'm a skeleton person, that's what I study, that there are a lot of weirdnesses basically about this skeleton. That it's not matched by anything in human evolution, which of course makes it unique and why a lot of people place it into its own species. But in some cases, that uniqueness moves away from anything associated with a kind of a normal functionality. And that, of course, is what drives me to think that this is a very complicated form. Given the fact that there's really only one diagnostic fossil, and that absolutely is the case, that I hold judgment, until others will have a chance to look at this in more detail or more fossils are found. Is it the case that no humans got to Flores, ever? Also hard for me to understand, actually, because you're seeing this, very wide-based distribution through these island communities, in the islands of Southeast Asia and into Australia, and why they would have gone by Flores just really strikes me as being very peculiar. There might be some reasons. People talk about the difficult currents which actually happen in around Flores, but they say the same thing about Timor, and there are archaeological sites and modern humans on Timor. Okay, so I'm going to hold my judgment on this and leave you with a very, very kind of crazy looking busy slide that I don't really necessarily want you to read the detail of, but it basically says, that, just as I was summarizing here at the end, that it could be, this new form, it could be a dwarfed Homo erectus, it could be a pathology, it could be any of a number of things and a number of different pathologies. So what I would like to do now, if it's okay, sort of end there. Good, we got lights, which is really helpful. And ask if there's any questions. I would love you to ask me some questions, okay? I don't know that I can answer them, but I would love to hear them. Okay. Uh-oh, we have everybody leaving. I did go a little bit long. Yes?
So given the complexity that you talked about and the inconsistencies that you talked about and the, observation that it's sort of really weird that you have this isolated island community, is this thing all a hoax, do you think? I mean, it sort of sounds like Piltdown Man to me.
It's a good question, isn't it? I mean, the thing, I have said that in the past. And I sort of always stop myself because I don't think that any of the people are bad scientists. I mean, I think that they're, doing a good job actually doing the analysis. I think that, basically it's one of these kinds of things where they have a strong perspective in one way, and then they will qualify it in a variety of ways. I have a hard time reading the literature on this because when they claim that it doesn't or has or doesn't have this morphology, just to give you one example, I had said the thin cortical bone thing. If you read, and that looks like a pathology to me, you see it in a lot of anemias, for example. I don't know all the disease states that could be out there. Diseases in the past are very hard to kind of diagnose. So the way the article is written, it says, cortical bone thickness is the same as it is in modern humans. And there's no chart and there's no reference.
So I think you need
So I can't even evaluate that. That's why I'm saying it the way I'm saying it. The contra arguments are not as based in facts as I would like them to be. Let's say that, yeah.
Okay.
Do I think it's a hoax? The thing is that I don't see how you would have this many people actually come, into a particular conclusion. I think that they're excellent morphologists, they're excellent people at their work. I will always, always, always damn any group of scientists that does not have an open community of scholarship, okay? I always say, if you're, making a good case, everybody should be able to see everything, right? Okay.
Right.
And then have just the normal sort of back and forth arguments, which are typical, okay? You would want people to have those. I don't think it's always you did this wrong, you did that wrong kind of a thing, okay? So people have big egos and things like this and have been tied to it in ways that I think has not been very productive.
Thank you.
Oh, of course. And in an hour or so, I'll have a big glass of wine. After I drive, yes.
I just thought it would be difficult to imagine an adult with microcephaly making it to adulthood, that might be an argument against microcephaly.
It's a good question. I can't say that I know. I mean, is it the case that microcephalic individuals are not long-lived?
Well, just because their brain function is so poor, they rely on being cared for.
You know what?
So.
I guess, as a person who's tried to deal with varieties of pathologies in the past, it's hard to say, what this would look like, okay, in modern terms. And the thing is that apparently, at least my thinking about it and my general reading about it is that microcephaly can manifest in a lot of behavioral deficiencies, but it's actually over a very broad range, okay? So, I mean, I'm sure that there could be cases of sort of shortened lifespan, but then, also normal lifespans.
I didn't really mean shortened lifespan. I just meant lack of ability to survive because they don't have the mental capacity. But
well,
anyway.
No, I totally understand what you're saying. And, so at one point we were writing papers on the beginnings of compassion in human evolution. and taking care basically of sick individuals and things like this. We have individuals in the past that we know have had major physical challenges that apparently live quite fine, actually. So these would be the occasions when broad communities basically work together as a unit, divide tasks and all these sorts of things. So we're able to, you know, function basically at a very high order, okay, under those kinds of conditions. So.
But I guess then you wouldn't think all 14 had microcephaly?
None of them had a head, so we don't know what they were
one.
like. Yeah,
There's
we
only
only
one,
have one
right.
head, I know. So
Right.
this is
That's a good point.
No, but you made a good point, and that is, if we had another head, I'd give a different talk. You see what I mean? Like, yeah. I mean, but like you've got one head and one humerus that looks like it's a regular height person, and a jaw that actually could be matched in any group of modern humans. So I can't speak to it, okay?
Thank you.
So I think it was a great point, yeah.
We'll take the guy over there
Yeah.
next.
One, I'm a pediatrician, and I've seen microcephalics grow up and multiply, so I'm not,
Okay,
okay.
Thank
But-
you.
But my question is, could this be founder's effect?
founder's effect. So, you know, basically just like a genetically differently structured population, a very small population in an island community.
You know, which
Yeah.
is common on islands.
Sure is. I mean, that in conjunction with island dwarfism, I'm sure there would be inbreeding and a loss of variation within the populations, absolutely. So then it's a very specific kind of a situation with this very limited kind of a gene base there. I can't say I would disagree with that. Nobody's talked about it specifically in those terms, but it makes some sense. Yeah.
You showed a lot of examples of extreme primitive morphology. But early in your talk, you showed a quick slide of their tools.
Yes,
Just from looking at it very quickly, they look pretty sophisticated.
they were.
So how do you reconcile that?
That I think maybe they're just small, modernish kind of people, or they are, you know, basically this is again a population, not necessarily just that one individual representing that whole population. I mean, you could think of it that way. And so, you know, basically we do know that Homo habilis is a tool maker with a slightly bigger brain size. So we know that a lot of our ancestors with small brain sizes are capable of making complex tools. They make those tools for a super, super long time without a lot of change in them, which is archaeologically kind of interesting and is seemingly the way to understand archaeological materials in that part of the world. And there you go. I mean, like, obviously they have the neurological capability to do this. And I even made the statement many times that they didn't even have the hand morphology to make tools. I mean, is there another form there, or is this just really some abnormality that we're looking at with this particular fossil?
Thank you.
It complicates it, absolutely. Yeah?
How much does damage to the fossils was due to being buried for 60,000 years?
It's a good question. The distortion that we see supposedly is not something that would happen under normal distortion context, okay, archaeologically or paleontologically. So it's a great question. That kind of, you know, sort of off-centered kind of face, usually things break or things like this. I have been told that the fossils were actually found in, you know, basically a watery sink within the cave. And when they were found, they were actually, and I've heard this from people and never have seen it printed, that they were actually spongy-like, okay? That they were squishy, okay? And so, like, it may be that, you know, they pulled out these sort of spongy kind of bones and then squished them into a position, and it was asymmetrical, and it was this, and it was too small, and it didn't have sutures. So, in other words, there's a lot of lore that goes on actually with this particular group of fossil finds, as well as the facts of what the bones actually look like. So, like, it's not typical taphonomic changes that we would expect because it's old. Okay. Yes.
You mentioned that there are certain similarities between them and the people currently living on the island, particularly that unique tooth
Yes.
formation. What's the explanation for that?
That they're the same people.
So are they just descendants, or are
There
they...
could be descendants of them. It would be the most likely explanation, showing continuity in time. And that they're not the sort of primitive Australopithecine early Homo kind of form. That they actually are relatively like Neanderthals are to modern humans in that kind of relationship. And that they are sharing genetic material with each other. Okay? They're not being replaced by modern humans coming from elsewhere, by a totally different population. That's why I gave that particular example, which is pretty compelling, because they say dental characteristics are genetically very conservative. So if you see them in we see other ones in other populations, actually, and they show this kind of continuity. So in this case, that strangeness is also showing continuity. Does it mean that it evolved but in two different people at two different times, or are they genetically related to each other? So it's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
No, you've compared this creature to an ape a number of times.
Yes.
Something that people have compared me to upon occasion. But, my question is, how sure
You
are
should
we
take that as a compliment.
how sure are we that this is the genus Homo? I mean, you find a bunch of bones, and then what criteria do you use to say, well, this is a humanoid, or this is the genus Homo, rather
Yes.
than some species of ape or something?
Yes. They use a lot of different criteria. And generally speaking, being a member of our lineage is defined by particular dental characteristics and also locomotory characteristics. I mean, we could challenge even some of the locomotory ones here. The dentition is really modern. The locomotion, I mean, I showed you that weird quadrupedal thing, but basically they're bipeds, but in a somewhat unusual kind of a fashion. So we would have to place them somewhere within our lineage. The features associated with the cranium, especially the small brain size, is the one which is generally used to link it to earlier forms of Homo, and of course then to extract it and place it in its own early species, okay, of Homo. So they use a variety of different kinds of measurements, okay. I didn't go into the detail of a lot of the slides, but a lot of those were actually discriminant function analyses, principal component analyses, where they take all of that data and then they sort it by shape and say where the fossils actually situate vis-a-vis each other. Okay? And that include the hand bones. I mean, pretty much everything that I showed you was one or another kind of analysis like that. So that's how they say it's a unique set of traits and it should be in its own species, but its closest taxonomic affinity is actually to Homo habilis. Okay. Yeah. Good question. I think that they are. I know that they're constantly looking for fossils there because they bear the same burden. They really do need multiple fossils actually to support the kinds of statements that they've been making. Okay. But I say again, for most people, the thinking is that this is this remnant early Homo form on the island, and that I won't say everybody, but probably like 75% of people probably are not quite likely actually to talk about the specimens as being pathological. The hardest thing that we can do in human evolution is describe a fossil as pathologic, because pathologies range broadly, basically, in humans. The way we identify them is usually not on bone. So of course, you know, it's just really hard to say, and it's also, then we're going back in the past, it's hard to say X characteristics, which we see in modern humans, we can actually see consistently implant into the past. So pathology is not an easy thing to show, actually, in any case, including on Flores. Yeah. That we call it a night? Thank you. And I forgot to say Happy New Year. You know, I hope it brings you happiness, joy, and good health, and maybe some extra bucks. At least in my case, if you will, everyone.